this is a bit of a homecoming for me. I started in the industry as an environmental engineer, working with some of you in this room, helping to build some of the critical infrastructure that has shaped our solid waste industry. Before we dive in though, and we have a lot to talk about today, I want to start by getting everyone's blood flowing. You guys just had breakfast, it's the first day of a full week, and in case you didn't wake up early to exercise, hopefully not dressed like this guy, I'm right there with you. I want to get our hearts moving here and really bring the energy to kick off this symposium. So I just want to ask everybody to stand up and watch your chairs and stuff as we run through this. And I think we have like well over 600 folks in this room. So if you've been, I like somebody back there is like stretching and exercising, so that's great. So I'd like you guys, if you have been in the industry 10 years or greater, still stay standing. Wow, there's like very few people that are sitting down. How about 15 years? 20 years? How about 25? 30 years? I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces too still standing. How about 35? Okay, 40? How many folks do I, raise your hand if you're still, it's hard for me to see. I think I see 2 folks? Okay, 41? When I think about the level of collective experience and knowledge in this room, by my estimates, we probably have close to 10,000 years of experience in this room. Pretty staggering, and it's humbling. It makes me extremely optimistic about how we can collectively tackle the challenges our industry and our world are facing, and your role, our role, in driving that change. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, because we are at a crossroads as a society, and the solid waste industry as we know it is at the crossroads and intersection of all that's changing. So I look across the room here today, I see so many familiar faces, friends, colleagues, mentors, suppliers, partners, competitors. And wherever you fall on this continuum, we're all in this together. Society is looking at our industry to solve some of our toughest challenges, and they are more dynamic and complex than ever before. And while this may seem daunting for some, this is nothing new for our industry. We've always solved tough challenges. In our industry, we've always held each other accountable to deliver those innovative solutions that are going to drive our industry forward. I think now more than ever, our industry is under a microscope. Conversations around landfills, recycling, the call for zero waste, all of this has placed this industry squarely in the public eye. They used to say our work was invisible. We would come in, we'd pick up your trash, and leave. But all that has changed. And now this increased level of attention and scrutiny has created an inflection point for all of us. So we're accustomed to local governments, environmental NGOs, customers, and other stakeholders leading the charge on the waste conversation. And there is another group that's emerging with a singular and very strong voice, and that's young people. Whether it's leading a local cleanup initiative, advocating for responsible legislation, or serving as an ambassador on climate change to the United Nations, this rising generation brings such passion and energy to the conversation around waste and sustainability. They're acting boldly, and they will not accept surface-level commitments. They're going to demand businesses and politicians and us in this room actively join them in changing the world one step at a time. Millennials are pioneers of change. This is a visionary generation that will be the last to have come into the world without the internet. They're the generation of the iPhone, and they're the last to experience a pre-9/11 world. Millennials, though, are not alone in pushing for change. They're joined by an even younger but mighty group known as Gen Z. And Generation Z is the most ethnically diverse and largest generation in American history, comprising 27% of the US population. These are the true digital natives. They're a group not only known for their ability to ask questions, but they're demanding answers. And together, these generations are holding all of us to a higher social standard in all parts of our lives, including at work. They've ably shown that they are particularly skilled at leveraging social channels to inform and inspire their peers to advocate and affect change. So my husband Joe and I, we have 2 children in Generation Z. Our son Julian, he's in middle school, and our daughter Cassandra, she's in 3rd grade. And these are the ones that help me reframe in my own mind the work that I and all of you do each day. See, they don't think about trash and recycling, they think about the planet. And it's incredible to look at the world through their eyes. While the innocence of youth is still there, they have access to information and education that has granted an incredibly enlightened sense of the world that I didn't understand until college, clearly. So recently, I was working on a slide deck, and Cassandra was watching over my shoulder, and that's my daughter. We were on a family trip to Washington, D.C., and doesn't she look like a future senator? We'll see about that. I don't know if I would recommend she goes into politics. Anyway, she asked me what I was working on. She was kind of looking over my shoulder, and it happened to be a presentation on renewable energy at our landfills. And she asked a ton of questions. She listened really intently to what I had to say. And then in her sweet little voice, she said to me, and true story, she actually said this, "Mom, thank you for saving the planet one project at a time." I mean, seriously, cue tears. Isn't that what we want from our kids? For our kids to think about what we do each and every day? And this gratitude gave me a fresh perspective. And it gave me insight into the perspective of the future leaders, engineers, and problem solvers, that our planet is a precious commodity, and the work that we all do, that you do, will play a critical role in how we reshape our communities for the future. What we do matters, and this doesn't just include the environment, it includes our people and our purpose. So my hope for today is that we'll walk away with a deeper understanding of how we arrived at this crossroads, the macro trends that will impact our industry on the road ahead, and the technology required to realize our vision of a sustainable tomorrow. I want you to leave here feeling inspired, and the only way to do that is to tap into your passion. And we're all here because we care about the future of this industry. So challenge one another and bring those difficult topics to the forefront. Over the last 30 years, we've seen the solid waste industry go through tremendous transformation, making living cities and communities possible. With the advent of Subtitle D landfills and engineered solutions, we continue to successfully revamp how waste was collected, how it's handled, and what it ultimately becomes at the end of its life. And while we've made dramatic changes over the last 30 years, the next 30 are pivotal. As our customers and communities increasingly demand that we help solve the world's problems and make significant changes to our models, we want to because we have a shared stake in the future of our planet. So before we look at the path ahead, let's remind ourselves just how far we've come. When I came into the waste industry 25 years ago, it was clearly defined as a solid waste industry, and it was firmly anchored by a collect and disposal model. In North America, most communities and customers generated trash, and they really weren't overly concerned with how their trash got collected. They knew we'd pick up their waste and take it to a landfill. They probably didn't realize or have much curiosity, for that matter, how the landfill was engineered or what its life cycle would be. 25 years ago, recycling was only beginning to be talked about broadly, the start of a much larger conversation on how we repurpose what we use every day. Fast forward to the early 2000s, where the beginnings of the environmental sustainability movement started to take root. The triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, was being discussed in boardrooms, but sustainability was perceived by some as a simple add-on to a business plan or an extension of a person's lifestyle. The definition of sustainability was so tightly tied to the environment that the term became synonymous with going green. Our customers, they began expressing concerns about the need to preserve natural resources, landfill airspace, and improve recycling across the United States. And at the same time, the industry started investing heavily in renewable energy at our landfills, and at Waste Management, we started investing heavily in natural gas collection trucks, the start of a closed loop in our materials management process. We know many cities and states responded to this change in customer sentiment by hiring consultants to help develop waste management plans, laying out recycling or diversion goals with elaborate strategies for achieving success. And to increase recycling in the U.S., states required dual-stream programs that eventually made way for single-stream, relying on waste-based measurements. In some cases, the state grants required that municipalities meet certain recycling thresholds as a requirement for funding, further driving more material types to be placed into these programs. And while aspirational for its time, this near-term strategy failed to take into account the long-term impacts of the shift. It's encouraging quantity over quality inadvertently contaminated the recycling stream. Fast forward to today, 2020. Businesses are increasingly taking a leadership role in how the world thinks about sustainability, and there is no doubt this will impact our industry positively. Whether it was the Business Roundtable's letter on the purpose of a corporation, or Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, in his annual memo to shareholders, the message is clear. Businesses must consider all stakeholders and shareholders. This includes customers, employees, communities, the environment, and then, of course, the shareholder. Going one step further, Larry Fink states that sustainability will now be the center of their investment approach, including exiting investments with high sustainability-related risk. Our industry must respond, and we are in a unique position to do so. And it's not just CEOs doing this kind of thinking. From an industry perspective, customers and communities are also thinking differently about the materials, and I do mean materials, we collect and handle on their behalf. So many of you have read the headlines about the death of retail, and I can't speak to that because when my daughter drags me to the Galleria Mall in Houston, it still seems packed on a Saturday afternoon. But what I can say is that the shift from brick and mortar to e-commerce has also shifted waste collection. So take me as an example. I don't have time to shop. I actually hate shopping. When I do need to shop, especially when it comes to shoes, like the shoes I'm wearing today, I go to my favorite online retailer, Zappos. Anybody else use Zappos in here? Yes. And so what I'll do is I'll order 10 or 12 pairs of shoes, thinking that I'm only going to keep one or two, and I'm keeping 3 or 4, much to my husband's chagrin. But this big box shows up, I do a little bit of a fashion show, figure out what I'm going to keep, and then send the rest back. Well, if you think about it, where the materials we discard, it's changing. That box of cardboard that used to show up at a retail shop is now showing up in our homes. So we have to think differently about the collection and disposal model we relied upon for the last 25 years. Every other week recycling at residences isn't cutting it anymore. In some cases, the trash container is smaller than the recycling bin. And it also goes beyond those traditional items. The products in our world are complex, from iPhones with lithium-ion batteries and flexible packaging with a multitude of plastic types in one small pouch, to the increase in single-use plastics in the streams we manage. The life cycle of these products must be considered. And all of this is happening at a time when the amount of material we in this room generate on a daily basis, remember that 4.4 pounds per person per day, that's increasing, not decreasing for the first time in our history. So new solutions are needed to address these trends around us, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to creating solutions for each waste type. Yet that customization, it can interfere with the successful management of our collective waste, which for the United States in 2018 was a staggering 456 million tons. So where do those 456 million tons go? For now, landfills remain the most cost-effective, scalable, and sustainable method for solid waste disposal in North America, especially when there are renewable energy or renewable natural gas facilities on site. And that's why you're all here today, to talk about this, I'm sure. And in markets like New England, where there's a tightening of disposal capacity, we have to focus on optimizing the landfills we have. Finding ways to expand them with the understanding that permitting in highly populated communities where these assets are needed is increasingly difficult. And while this trend may not hold true across all of North America, two things are clear. We must find linkages through robust transportation networks to other landfills, and at the same time, we have to find ways to build out new infrastructure in these poor markets. All this said, we know landfills face mounting challenges, including increased scrutiny related to greenhouse gas emissions and pressures related to leachate outlets, especially as POTWs require upgrades to meet more stringent discharge standards. We have to continue to search for the next generation technology that will replace these critical assets, allowing our cities and towns to continue to grow while providing alternatives that can shape how these communities grow. And if there's one major theme here, it's that innovation will open doors to endless possibilities. So, when we think about our business and how we must respond to these crossroads we're facing, there are four global themes that I want to touch on today. We must think differently in how we approach building our solid waste program and infrastructure to respond to these four themes. And this is going to require the support from a range of stakeholders. So we have to be open and transparent about the challenges we face to deliver comprehensive solutions as a global community working together. First, the rise of cities.
In 1950, New York and Tokyo were the only so-called megacities, cities with more than 10 million inhabitants. By 1980, these were joined by Mexico City, Sao Paulo, and Osaka. In 2010, there were over 20 megacities, spanning almost every continent. Today, there are 32 megacities. Urbanization is happening faster than at any time in human history. Asia accounts for over half of today's megacities. By 2030, nearly 9% of the world's population will live in 41 megacities. But it's in Africa where some of the most rapid urbanization will take place in the future.
So the video talked about the rise of the megacity, those cities with over 10 million inhabitants. But urbanization, that is a trend that's growing with other size cities. In 2010, there were 41 areas with more than 1 million people in the United States. That's up from 12 areas with this kind of population in 1950. This number is expected to grow to 53 by 2030. While Los Angeles, which is a short drive from here in the Northeast, make up a third of the US GDP, we're seeing the rise of second-tier cities, and this trend does not have an end in sight. As cost of living increases in places like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, we're seeing people move to places like Austin, Nashville, Charlotte, Orlando, and Boise. And that same trend is playing out globally. The United Nations says that 68% of the world population is projected to live in urban areas by 2050. At the same time, climate change impacts are shifting where people will live, as some places near the equator will be uninhabitable by the end of the century. So why do I mention all this? Because rising populations and population shifts naturally mean an increase in solid waste generation in certain places, which puts the onus on us to consider options to keep pace with this rising demand. Will these cities have the necessary infrastructure to support these population booms for the long term? How can we build out the infrastructure in these cities now to prepare each city for what is to come? We must ensure that they have the means to address critical public health needs and long-term sustainable solutions for their solid waste infrastructure as populations change. The second trend is something I'll call local versus national. And it's not that local municipalities are in competition with the federal government. It's more about what local governments are doing to pick up the mantle that had once been held at the national level. So when the United States withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, over 20 states and 50 cities pledged to remain in the program. Interestingly, other cities are going a step further to introduce programs that they think will make a difference from an environmental perspective. I'll give you an example of what one city is doing to combat the impacts of climate change. Take a look.
Salt Lake City on its best days is sunny, it's blue, clear skies, and clean air.
On its worst days, you don't want to go outside and take a deep breath of air. It might even be hard to see across the street, definitely hard to see the mountains on some of those inverted days.
You know, climate change in particular, it's impacting us right now. It's in our own backyards. We're dealing with it in terms of drought. We're dealing with it in terms of reduced snowpack. So those are issues that are here and now, and without bold leadership, they're just going to get worse.
I started to care about air quality when my first child was born during an inversion, during a legislative session, and I was listening to the radio local news talk about how the legislature had just received a report that a cumulative impact of living in this valley over the course of a lifetime could take an average of 2 years off a person's life.
Utah Clean Energy is a local nonprofit, and we work to turn the tide on climate change by making sure that everybody has affordable and easy access to clean energy. Salt Lake City is really a trailblazer, and they have set the bar for what other local governments can do to lead out on air quality and climate solutions. The Climate Positive Plan is groundbreaking.
In the next 2 years, we should have 80% electric power supply for our municipal needs. That's for the city's energy needs. And our goals are taking us to a 100% renewable for every power need in the city by 2030.
10, 15 years ago, it was hard to even talk about climate change. Air quality was not the issue that it is today. And so the fact that more people are talking about these issues and really demanding bold action, that is the most significant change I think that we've seen since we started.
I think in the over 10 years or so I've been working on air quality, it's since we've had the business voice come to this conversation that it's really given us some real hope to change the policies and the investments that we can to improve the air we breathe so that Salt Lake City is a majority of those great days and we can get rid of many of those worst days.
So what's happening in Salt Lake City, it's a great example of a public-private partnership, a city government and nonprofits coming together to face the challenge head-on. And we should expect that if the federal government does not take environmental concerns into consideration from a policy-making perspective, that cities and states are going to step in to fill the void. Earlier this month, at Waste Management Sustainability Forum held at the Phoenix Open, former Secretary of State John Kerry talked about this and how corporations and smaller local governments will drive the change necessary to reshape how we think about addressing climate change. Many cities and states are taking these steps, mandating renewable fuel vehicles for their solid waste collection fleets, banning single-use plastics and plastic bags, and investing in recycling, including the use of recycled content in the products they purchase. Here's another example of that, so take a look at this video.
What's really important in this area of sustainability is not just to continue the talk, but it's the actionability that's important.
We have a situation where we continue to produce 4.4 pounds of trash per person per day, and that number unfortunately is not going down.
You have to start somewhere, and recycling is really the first step. The process for recruiting originally started with our internal management team looking for a way to make our manufacturing process more efficient, which ultimately grew into making a product that was made of 100% post-consumer material, which happens to be the bottle that you and I use every day.
Cast Engineering was founded on the triple bottom line philosophy, people, planet, and profit. Our purpose is to have a positive impact on the environment, society, and to be financially successful.
Sustainability and care for nature and well-being has always been the DNA of SD as a company and Torque as a brand.
The Pratt family has always believed in sustainability. We process about 2.5 million tons annually in our mills. Every ton we save about 7 trees.
When we make recycled material versus virgin material, it's an offset of about 45% energy savings, 20% water savings, and 30% greenhouse gas emission savings.
And there's no reason why our business can't be profitable, viable, grow, and still achieve the objective of doing what's right for our planet.
Most consumers are starting to take a look at the environment, particularly our millennials, our Gen Zers. They really do have a concern with where their material is coming from, how they're being made, and what impact does that have on the environment.
Sustainability products do not have to equate to lesser quality. The expectation in the marketplace is you have to bring the performance characteristics as ticket to play. The fact that it's environmental, third-party certified, compostable, yes, our products have that as well, but we take that one isn't a trade-off for the other. We have to deliver both, and we take both equally serious.
The circular economy is not a fad. Obviously it's here to stay, and we think we're doing a lot of good by helping these companies hit their sustainability goals.
Don't think that you're too small or you're too insignificant to play a part in that chain. We all have to have the attitude of get it done.
Sustainability is key in every decision that we make, and as we look forward to growing our business and to offering innovation, it has to be done more sustainably.
It's really inspiring what these companies are doing, because if you think about it, they are proof positive. You can absolutely do the right thing for your business and for your customers while doing the right thing for the environment. It's about creating demand for those products. So at Waste Management, we continue to support climate action to meet the Paris Agreement. We are part of the We're Still In Declaration, and as an example of our commitment to creating a better world, we have a goal to offset 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions that we generate by 2038. Our company has made a lot of progress on this goal and also to reduce our fleet emissions. Today, 60% of our collection trucks are compressed natural gas vehicles, and a third of these are running on renewable natural gas, which reduces our emissions by over 80% compared to diesel. Within the next 15 years, we're committed to getting those numbers to 90%. Also, over the last 15 years, you may know that Waste Management has had a robust partnership with the Wildlife Habitat Council. And our partnership with the Wildlife Habitat Council really demonstrates that companies in our industry can be the voice for what many people call our silent constituent, the environment. And it doesn't and shouldn't stop with the protection of wildlife. One of the biggest actions we can take is to address the radical deforestation that has occurred in our world since the Industrial Revolution, eliminating key carbon sinks that once existed. We should and must do something about the trillions of trees that have disappeared over the last 200 years. That's half of the world's trees in 2 centuries. Let's take a look at what Detroit, Michigan is doing about this.
Detroit is a very special city. The economy in the United States would not be what it is without the city of Detroit.
Detroit's history over the past 70 years is basically one of disinvestment.
And Detroit has, at one point, over 40 square miles of vacant land. Most folks saw that as a liability. The Greens saw that as an asset. When you see the economic decline here in the city, it allowed us to have the opportunity to repurpose green spaces, vacant lots, redevelopment parks.
Planting trees is the single most important nature-based solution that we can implement to mitigate climate change.
One single tree can absorb, one mature tree rather, can absorb about 50 pounds of carbon in a year, carbon dioxide. That's one tree. So think what could happen when we planted over 130,000 trees since our inception. Trees just look good, they make you feel better. I can go on and on with the benefits of trees.
Beyond that, planting trees is relatively easy and inexpensive to do. It's something that everybody can do. I think of trees as valuable assets and infrastructure in cities, not unlike the sewer system or the electrical grid. People's public health is suffering for want of trees, and the quality of their air and water is diminished for want of trees. In a nutshell, trees do a heck of a lot to take care of us, and we want to take care of the trees.
Can't really argue with trees. It's hard to argue with trees here. But at the end of the day, this is a great example of a community doing something actionable that's going to have a long-term impact on the city of Detroit itself, but also on the planet. And as an industry, when we're doing these development projects, we have an opportunity to consider how we can incorporate the natural habitat into the designs for those evolving infrastructure needs, figuring out a way to restore natural habitats and restore natural resources. So it's not one thing, it really is a mosaic of many contributions when it comes to how our cities and states are thinking about their role in addressing climate change. And on the solid waste side, in many ways, the dialogue is shifting from a more narrow solid waste focus to an examination of the broader environmental infrastructure needs such as water, energy, and transportation. For the first time, cities are really starting to examine recycling those materials that make the most environmental sense to recycle. And they're quietly pulling back from some of the more unrealistic zero waste goals that may contribute ultimately to our carbon problem. One area where cities and states continue to lead is around organics and food waste. And we're seeing organics legislation in local municipalities increasing, albeit slowly. And there's a trend towards legislation focusing on reduction instead of a simple focus on end-of-life bans. With organics making up well over 30% of the waste stream, there's a huge opportunity to consider how we move unused or unwanted food to people who desperately need it, eliminating food waste altogether. And we expect this trend to grow. But as one of North America's largest transportation and logistics companies, we can play a role in figuring out how to move these materials to those that need them. So the third trend is something I'm calling our planet, our resources. The world really is starting to see the impact of humanity's decisions through climate change. Storms are more frequent and intense, and rainfall patterns are changing. In 2018 alone, we saw more Category 4 hurricanes make landfall in the U.S. than ever before. In January 2017, several scientific organizations around the world, including NASA and NOAA in the United States, and the Met Office in the United Kingdom, named 2016 the warmest year on record. This marked the third consecutive year reaching a new record temperature, and 2016's record meant that 16 of the 17 warmest years have occurred since 2000. How can our industry respond and address climate change, and what climate resiliency infrastructure must we have in place to respond? So these remarks, they're not intended to be controversial in any way, but I think it's important to say at this juncture there's two things that I believe. The first, the science is clear. Climate change is happening, period, full stop. The second, mankind has had a large hand in exacerbating that. Big contributing factor. And there may be people who would like to debate that statement, but for me, the debate is over. We need to focus on efforts to drive solutions in that regard. So Christiana Figueres, she's a key player in the creation of the Paris Climate Accords, and she recently spoke at the Sustainability Forum I referenced. So the clip I was going to show you is a clip of Christiana talking about waste management and the fact that should we consider changing our name? Because at the end of the day, what we manage on a daily basis are materials, not necessarily waste. And they have a lot of value. And in the clip, she talked about the fact that when she made the comments that our senior leadership team and our comms people were in the room, and perhaps they might be all panicking by her merely saying that. And what's interesting about that is that we weren't panicking, because these are some conversations that we've been having as a leadership team. What we do every day, it is materials management, and those materials have value. We need to consider how we think about our planet and those precious resources that it's been giving to us. And one way we can do this is really to think differently on how we utilize these resources. Is something that she talked about in her speech, a term called radical regeneration. How can we return those resources into something else? In our industry, we talk a lot about recycling, including plastics, and single-use plastics, they become a hot topic, a rallying cry when you look at the plastics in our oceans. How do we turn off the faucet? What collection infrastructure is needed and where? What alternatives are out there for single-use plastics? How do we solve for that friction between the many benefits of plastics and the harm they can cause when they're not managed properly? It's true that China and Indonesia account for more than a third of all plastic debris in our oceans. And how can we, as leaders in the most innovative environmental solutions industry in the world, model the solutions for addressing these challenges on a global scale? While the recent conversations have honed in on plastics, the topic of greenhouse gas emissions continues to be front and center. Energy production of all types accounts for 72% of all emissions globally. We continue as a society to demand more and more energy, so how can we change where it comes from, and how can we be more efficient with what we do use? So presently in our business, we produce energy through our landfills and waste-to-energy plants across the globe. All of our landfills generate methane, a byproduct of the decomposition process, but we have options and solutions to generate renewable energy from the methane that is produced. We also need to do more as an industry to minimize the methane emissions from our landfills and harness this energy for more renewable options. And speaking of renewable energy, again, as one of North America's largest transportation and logistics companies, we're constantly examining ways to reduce our energy consumption and carbon footprint. That's one reason why we moved from diesel to CNG over 10 years ago. But we often get asked about electric trucks, and we do believe there's a future in this technology and in our business as the technology scales for longer range at a similar cost structure to what we have today. Because ultimately, it has to do the job for our customers. It may be down the road that electric vehicles fueled from renewable sources like wind, solar, and landfill gas, they can be the future of our transportation platforms in the new century. Who knows? I think the topic of water quality and conservation is also top of mind. We have to continue to focus on improving techniques to manage water demand and conserve water for our future. And we know there are emerging threats I looked at the agenda, and there's going to be a lot of conversation regarding PFAS, so I know that's going to be a hot topic at this conference. And we can and should play a role in generating solutions for problems like these. We have an opportunity to forge strategic partnerships with other world-class organizations to solve the issues challenging our water infrastructure. Again, these are tough and heady topics, but if not this industry to have those debates, then who? Finally, the fourth trend I would like to touch on is corporate social responsibility, perhaps most appropriately known recently as social impact. You heard me mention earlier the Business Roundtable's new statement on the purpose of a company and Larry Fink's letter to CEOs. It's clear our world is changing, and it's in large part by millennials and soon-to-be Gen Zers entering our workforce. It's logical and it's perhaps even simple to really think that to remain in business for the long haul, focusing on every stakeholder, not just the shareholder, will drive long-term returns and will grow a vibrant company. Just want to be clear though, it's every stakeholder and the shareholder is important. And these modern principles, they're definitely consistent with the way waste management is approaching its place in the world. We realize that while waste management is a strong foundation of great work in our communities, as many of your companies do, we have an opportunity to make an even bigger impact for the families we serve and the places our WM families call home. You see, impact does not represent a singular moment, but rather a lasting change that endures. And over the last few months, we've been on a journey of discovery to define issues of concern for our employees, our customers, and communities as we transition waste management from a best-in-class environmental solutions company to a world-class, purpose-driven business and thought leader. And I'm excited for what that means for our industry and for the communities we call home. So those are the four big megatrends that will shape our industry. And one common thread that will no doubt be interwoven throughout is the digital revolution and how technology will play a pivotal role in all of our solutions. Innovations, small and large, are going to help us tackle climate change and climate impacts. They're also going to provide a redefinition of what the industry and the jobs within this very industry look like. There's so much out there, so much promise, and is one of the reasons I'm very optimistic about how this industry can help transform our world. So if you think about these themes, what does it all mean? What will our world look like 25 years from now? And how will all of you have helped to reshape the face of the solid waste industry? I believe we'll create a better world, one with clean air, streets, cities, forests, hiking paths, streams, and oceans, not just in the industrialized world, but everywhere. This industry will have built dynamic infrastructure that meets the individual needs of the communities we serve, but also addresses some of the challenges I referenced facing our planet. This means we're closing the loop and connecting recycling programs with demand for recycled products, ensuring that what we produce in our economies can be easily collected, processed, and turned into that next new product. Tackling some of the harder issues in our business, like organics and textiles, and working with these constituent groups to ensure no food is wasted and that textile and apparel production uses sustainable methods throughout the life cycle of their products. Evolving our transportation and logistics models, using fuels that have the lowest overall carbon footprint while doing the job necessary for our customers. This could be CNG, this could be electric, this could be hydrogen, this could be something else. Who knows, but the important thing is that we're thinking about it. Ensuring that we examine those innovations that can replace landfills in the long run while balancing how we get there. Continuing to invest in new technologies to mitigate impacts from landfills while looking at those technologies that can turn the materials we discard into those new products. Reframing the future of how we work in this industry. Transitioning from drivers who are laborers, think of that traditional rear load driver, to drivers who are technicians with technology at their fingertips through innovations in the cabs of our trucks and on the trucks themselves. And if we do this, everyone in this room from this industry will have done their part to build a world where sustainability makes good economic sense for businesses and will have played a pivotal role in changing our planet for the better. So I want to close out this session by talking a little bit about people. I've been so fortunate to be a part of the fabric of this great industry. And as a woman in waste, I often get asked about how the industry has changed or what it's been like for me these past 25 years. One of Waste Management's commitments and values is indeed inclusion and diversity, and I'm passionate about this. We've come a long way, but we can do so much more, and all of you can too. Our industry can and must do more to reflect the communities we serve, especially in the technical ranks, related to ethnic and gender diversity. And if you think about it, there are so many programs that are out there where you all can take an active role, STEM programs in underserved communities, career days for high school girls. Talent is out there, and our industry has one of the greatest purposes of all, to make living in our communities possible. For me, I graduated college in 1994, and back then, my engineering class had 20% women. 25 years later, the percentage has more than doubled to almost 44%. And that's great progress. The path at Waste Management has been similar. When I entered our company in the late 90s, there were very few women in leadership positions, very few to look up to and learn from. But just like my alma mater, that has changed. It's one of the reasons why I take that extra moment whenever asked to talk to folks and share my thoughts on the path. I'm really proud to be on Waste Management's senior leadership team with two amazing women, Davina Rankin, our Chief Financial Officer, and Tamla Oates-Forney, our Chief People Officer. And our CEO, Jim Fish, has made it clear that diversity matters at all levels of our organization, through his words and through his actions. So when people say to me, and people say this to me a lot, they'll say to me, "You're such a great role model for your daughter." And I pause, because my response usually is, I hope I'm an even better role model for my son, Julian. I hope I set an example for him of what it's like to have a strong female presence in the workplace, what it means to be a working mom, and what that means for a man in a family environment. And whatever he chooses to do, he has choices too, including raising a family on his own. So it's been my privilege to be here today, and I hope I've given you not only some insight into how Waste Management is approaching the challenges facing our industry, but also a sense of optimism on how collectively we're going to tackle them. And I can't speak for anyone else in this room, but when I think about my job, I really do think about my daughter's words, "Thank you for saving the world one project at a time." And that's what all of you are doing. So I may not be the star of the next Avengers movie, thank God for that, but in my children's eyes, I am their hero, and so you better believe I'm going to do everything in my power to make their world a better place. I owe it to them, and we all owe it to each other. Thank you.
Yes, so if you have a question, throw your hand up. We have a couple folks with mics. We will run to you. It's a big room, so please don't start shouting. We'll come to you, and then you ask your question. Any questions for Tara?
I know this guy.
So thank you very much, and very much enjoyed this. I was at that sustainability forum, and I think that one of the things that John Kerry also said is that governments can't fix this. It's going to take individuals and corporations. That's sort of a comment to your presentation. You all are part of of the America Recycles Initiative. There's now 149 signatories to it, and none of them have made a commitment to content. How do we get that to happen, where they make content commitments, and so this idea of creating a circular aspect of this model works?
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, right? Because it's sort of a continuum of a conversation, and so you're right, they haven't made the commitment to content, but what we're trying to do is really elevate those entities who are creating products out of recycled content. So one of the things that was highlighted in that video was Cascade's EcoPart. And so if you think about it, in our industry, we're creating and collecting recycled materials, plastics, and we have these carts and toters that we put out on the curb that were not made from post-consumer content. So for us, it's about trying to make those connections, and so we play a part in that as well. As far as driving the conversation with some of the CPG companies and on that side, it really is about ensuring that they understand what their role is. They get it clearly because of the war on plastic, and there's a lot of concern that there may be single-use bans. So there's an imperative getting to a number. It'll take some time, but it's making sure that the infrastructure is in place to do that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Marco Castaldi from City College of New York. I'm wondering the perspective that you might have, or waste management has, on landfill mining. And the reason why I ask is there's a lot of discussion about it. You mentioned materials, which I think is definitely in the right direction. And I was part of a project, I know there's many other projects that go on with the amount of metals, for example, that are in landfills already, can be retrieved today, I think economically, I'm not really sure, but definitely technically feasibly. And so when we talk about materials, and you know, of course we've got plenty that are coming at us in just the waste streams today. I'm just curious as to the perspective of landfill mining, because it seems difficult. I'm not sure if it's practical, and you know, from a company that owns them, does it, works it, and manages them, what's the perspective on that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's something that we continue to look at and examine, and we get asked a lot about it. Does it make sense to go in and mine some of these older landfills? And we're going to continue to look at that from an economical perspective, but at the end of the day, what we're really focused on right now is what's coming into our facilities and how can we change that conversation potentially. You know, we have a lot of landfills across North America, and if you think about what's happening on the West Coast with the yard waste bans that were just put into place, really thinking differently about the materials that are coming in the door and are there different solutions that we need to build. On landfill mining, there's a whole host of other considerations because from an environmental perspective and from an odor, gas perspective, we need to think through that as well. So we're going to continue to examine it. I would say it's not at the forefront today of our thinking. I see another hand up. Hand.
Hi, Tara. So, talking about the focus on climate change, I've heard some suggestions that we might end up, given limited resources, fighting the symptoms of climate change without necessarily fighting the root of climate change. Thinking about some of the things that we've seen over the past year, the wildfires in Australia, or talking about the hurricanes and things that have hit the United States, doing the cleanup and the aftermath of dealing with those things. Are going to cost so much that we're not going to be able to actually go to the heart of reversing the actual root of climate change.
Yeah, I think it's really a great point. If you think about a good analogy I would use in the plastic conversation, there was a whole lot of discussion around plastic straws. And plastic straws, when you think about they were a symptom of a larger problem, where it was really about driving the right type of conversation. And I think that's also true of climate change and climate impacts. It's understanding the individual decisions that we can make, whether it's in government or also in corporations. You know, a great example, when Larry Fink's letter came out, there was a lot of discussion about, well, we should just stop investing in fossil fuel companies. Well, at the end of the day, everyone in this room demands energy. And the impacts to the world would be far worse if you just all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, stopped using fossil fuels in our world. What it does mean, though, is we have to think through what are those things that we can change, on what timeline, and how fast can we make it happen. Because there is a lot out there from the standpoint of innovation and really thinking differently in the energy space, which is the biggest component of greenhouse gas emissions, on how we can speed up that trajectory. So I think, you know, we sort of view it as it's not a start of a conversation, but you have to start somewhere. And if you look at, you know, the work that Greta had done in a very short period of time, I mean, she elevated the conversation in a way that others hadn't. And I think that will help expedite some of the change that we're trying to see. Anyone else?
Yes, good morning. You hear the candidates running for office this year talking a lot about the Green New Deal. Can you talk about that a little bit and what it might mean for the waste management industry? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's still a little bit too soon to tell, but you know, obviously we track as an industry from a policy perspective, cap and trade and what that might mean for our industry. I think there's a couple things that we can do as an industry now, and I know that many of you in this room have seen the NASA study, which I know is something that will likely be a topic in some of the sessions. So first and foremost, some of the things that we can do today is make sure that for the operators in the room, the facilities that we run, we know how to operate good landfills. We know what the cover management practices should be. We know what the gas management practices should be. And so we have to be really strong and good operators and elevate our game. We also then need to be thinking about making that connection to more renewable projects. We started to do that with renewable natural gas projects. And I know with what's been happening in the RIN space, it might have slowed investments over the last year, but closing that loop is important. From a cap and trade perspective, I mean, the biggest risk would be if our landfills are no longer considered carbon sinks. And that's something that we're going to have to watch and address pretty closely and ensure that the public policy folks out there and the politicians understand at the end of the day what these facilities do. It's too soon to tell if that were to happen, what that potentially might mean in a cap and trade scenario on how that would trade. Cap and trade in Canada for us isn't necessarily bad, but it goes to the old adage, the devil's in the details. And so until we understand what those details would be, it's a little premature to say. But at the end of the day, I go back to that 450 million plus tons of material that we generate in North America every day. It has to go somewhere. Someone has to pay for that material to be responsibly disposed, and that's not going to change overnight with the Green New Deal either.
More over here.
Susanna Cagle with NG. So we are the world's largest independent power producer. We produce 2% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, so not coming at you all for that. a great place, but working in our sustainability practice, so trying. You talked a little bit about afforestation and kind of the impact that has on the environment. So planting a tree, right, has 50 pounds of CO2 capture capability. The average person produces about 54,000 pounds of CO2 per year. It's a big gap in there. I'm a little curious about your perspective on carbon capture and storage technologies outside of the traditional landfill kind of variety and some of the renewable energy solutions you came up with, right? There's a spectrum of CCS and kind of how you see the waste industry partnering with some of those more traditional CCS technologies that might enable you all to sequester more and sequester faster.
Yeah. I mean, I think what that goes to is the innovation we talked about, and I talked about in my speech. At the end of the day, I think technology is rapidly evolving in many different spaces, and it's about plugging in to those technologies that can either help the industry that we have today and the technologies we have today, like landfills, or those technologies that we may have in the future. At the Sustainability Forum, I referenced, we have a technology, a company that we're partnered with called Continuous, where we're taking low-value plastics and turning that material into a roofing material. So that's about really, maybe that's not carbon capture, but that's rethinking sort of that material chain. The same is true on carbon capture technologies. What are the ones where we could potentially plug in? And to be very clear, at least at Waste Management, we have our eye very much at looking at what some of those technology types could be and how we could use them in our business. I think you're going to see that rapidly evolve moving forward. And I really meant when I said it's not one thing, it's probably thousands of things that are going to help us in the future.
All right, great. I think that brings us up to our time, Tara. Thank you so much.